Following my mother's death, I sifted through family papers and came upon my grandmother's photos. Looking at these images, I was struck by the passage of time in a person's existence, and I began to think about my grandmother's life. How little I knew. When I was a child, she seemed distant, matter of fact, and had a narrow view of the world. My mother would have described her as harsh and unloving. And yet, I remember times when she was very silly with me, clowning around, making me laugh. After hours of research, looking at photos and documents, and remembering my mother's stories, another picture of this life emerged for me, and a crankie was born. This is the story of Magdalena Kuhlmann. Magdalena was my Oma, my mother's mother. She was born in 1896 and grew up in Bad Homburg, which is in Germany. She was the oldest of 6 children. Her father, Georg, was a delivery man who delivered his goods by horse and buggy to the people of the town. Magdalena's mother said that her father hit her on the ears when she was little, and that was why she was deaf. Georg was a heavy drinker and a violent man. His wife, pregnant again, divorced him when Magdalena was 18 years old. My mother, Hildegard, only met her grandfather twice, and on one of those occasions she bravely confronted him about hitting her mother. But he denied it and claimed that his eldest daughter was deaf from birth. The details of Magdalena's early life are vague, but it was likely not a happy childhood. Magdalena became a student at the Institution for the Deaf in a town 3 hours away from home, where she met Bernhard Friedrich. She was deaf and he was hard of hearing. It was a good match. While in school, Magdalena lived with a good family, but Bernhard, though he lived with the mayor of this town, was treated poorly. Magdalena would bring him food because he didn't get enough to eat. When World War I broke out, she was 18 years old. After the war, Magdalena and Bernhard married and moved to Offenbach. Bernhard worked in a factory that manufactured screws. She was 25 years old. They lived in a 3-room apartment in a house built in the back of a courtyard. It was heated with a coal stove. There was running water and a sink for all apartment dwellers to share. Life was tough. Being handicapped and living between 2 world wars brought many hardships to the couple. Magdalena and Bernhard had 6 children together. 1 child was stillborn. 1 died of heart failure at 10 months old. Another child died at 4 years old from diphtheria. And then there was Rudy. My mom remembers him well. He was also deaf, likely from an ear infection. He died suddenly of meningitis. He was 7 years old. Only my mother and 1 brother survived into adulthood. All this time, Bernhard's family did not approve of the marriage. His father was a smith, and several of his siblings owned businesses. His family was of middle class, and Magdalena's family was very poor. This is my mother with her grandmother Anna. Little Hilda remembers her speaking in a very sharp dialect. "Gist von Danne," meaning don't touch this. However, they must have taken pity on my mother. On school holidays, Magdalena put a sign around Hilda's neck and sent her by train to her father's family. She remembered all the lovely things in her aunt's notion store. She remembered bathing in the river lawn. This aunt was not married and had no children. She sewed new clothes for young Hilda, and when Hilda was 10 years old, this kind auntie sewed a beautiful dress and had her portrait painted. This portrait is hanging in my living room today. This was also a time when yet more tragedies struck the family. Papa Bernhard was a kind man who always took care of his family, but he became very sick, unable to work, and was bedridden for a long time. Little Hilda had to take care of him while her mother was working as a cleaning woman, which was the only income they had. He was often in the hospital, yet Magdalena visited him every single day. One night, Hilda woke up with a start. Her father's portrait, which hung over her bed, had fallen to the floor with a crash. In the morning, the family learned that Bernhard had died in hospital during the night. Hilda was 10 years old. I still have his picture with a damaged frame in my house. Magdalena was now widowed with 4 of her children still alive, ages 10, 9, 2, and 3 months old. In 1933, Hitler came to power. By 1935, all Germans were to provide proof that they were descendants of the presumed Aryan race. The national goal was to sort out citizens by racist categories in order to withdraw human rights and eventually murder the undesirables. In 1939, Hildegard was only 13 years old, but the job fell to her to conduct extensive family research dating back to 1808 and to provide the authorities with a genealogy table. Magdalena married again, another deaf man, just 3 months before World War II broke out. This is a rather innocent-looking poster of the time, but behind it lay a sinister plan. Citizens that were deemed genetically defective and did not fit into the ideological perfection of the Germanic race were forcefully sterilized. There were 8 reasons for forced sterilization. Hilda was required to fill out a lengthy questionnaire that was mandatory under threat of jail. All ancestors were to be listed, their handicaps, and cause of death. She was also required to answer many personal questions. This 7-page document was to be signed by the mayor. In the end, Magdalena escaped sterilization, perhaps because her deafness was deemed not hereditary, or because she was near the cutoff age of 45. In spite of so much darkness in their lives, the family found a community in the local chapter of the Hearing Impaired Society. This community was very tight-knit, with lots of good parties and many field trips together. The deaf had their own culture, and it provided a refuge from the rest of the world. This was a world where they understood one another literally and figuratively. Magdalena would be a loyal member of the society for 68 years. After 41 years of marriage, Magdalena became widowed for a second time. She continued to work cleaning houses and stores, babysitting, and other jobs well into her 80s. last few years, still full of life, she became friends with another deaf man who was young enough to be her grandson. But he was likely her lover. She looked happy in the pictures with him. At age 87, fit as a fiddle and still in this relationship, she carried a bag of garbage into the alley and fell dead to the ground.